Before learning about specific weed species and control of those species, we're going to review some basic biology and identification. So a textbook definition of a weed might be something like this: an undesirable plant because of its disruptive effect on the aesthetic appearance, ability to stabilize the soil, or the overall use of the turf. A more simple and useful definition would be a plant out of place. This could be not only a traditional weed species such as dandelion or clover, but also a turfgrass species that is in an area that it is not supposed to be in. The primary problem caused by weeds in turf is quite obvious. They disrupt visual uniformity of the turf. In turfs that are used for unique functions, such as golf greens or athletic fields, weeds can disrupt play. Visual uniformity is disrupted because the weed is different shape, color, or growth habit than the desired turf species. These differences can result in clumping and patchiness. Weeds can also negatively impact the turf by competing for resources necessary for growth, such as water and nutrients. Weeds typically show up for a reason. A common cause for weed invasion is a weakened turf. A turf can be weakened for a number of reasons, including damage from disease or insects, reduced density due to a lack of water or nutrients, or physical damage from traffic or compaction. Planting a species not suited for a particular site can also lead to thin turf. This commonly happens in shaded areas where many species cannot form a dense turf. Adverse environmental conditions and poor soil conditions can also stress a turf to the point that it becomes weak and weeds begin growing. The weeds we will discuss are problematic because they are able to be mowed and still survive. The broadleaf weeds that are problems in turf have what is referred to as a rosette growth habit, which means that these species have leaves that lay flat and close to the surface of the ground. Oftentimes, the presence of a specific weed can indicate an underlying problem in a turf. For instance, areas that have highly compacted soils will often be invaded by prostrate knotweed. In areas that are deficient in nitrogen, a legume such as white clover would likely to be established. When pH is higher than optimum, broadleaf plantain populations can increase. There are three categories of weeds that affect turf: grasses, sedges, and broadleaves. The grassy weeds can be either warm season or cool season. Warm season grassy weeds will germinate when soil temperatures are warm in late spring and summer. Cool season grassy weeds will germinate when air temperatures are conducive to growth and development. These grasses will usually germinate in the late summer or early fall. There are several important morphological characteristics that distinguish the grasses from the broadleaves. This list is not exhaustive, but highlights the most obvious differences, such as the parallel leaf veins and existence of only one cotyledon. Here you can see some of the more common cool season grassy weeds. The sedges look very similar to grasses, but different in a number of ways. They have three-sided stems, lack distinct nodes on the stem, do not possess auricles and ligules, and often have rough leaf margins. Broadleaf weeds have two cotyledons, netted leaf veins, root systems with tap roots, and leaves that are attached on short stalks. Here are four examples of broadleaf weeds. Weed species can be further classified based on life cycle. Annuals complete their life cycle in a single year. Biennials complete their life cycle in 2 years, and perennials live for more than 2 years. There are two types of annuals: summer annuals and winter annuals. Summer annuals germinate in late spring and then flower in the fall. They then often die after the first fall frost. Prostrate knotweed and prostrate spurge are both summer annuals. Winter annuals germinate in late summer or early fall. They then survive the winter in a dormant state and flower and produce seed in the spring. They usually die during the summer. Common chickweed and annual bluegrass are winter annuals. We will only be studying one biennial in this class. Bull thistle experiences vegetative growth during the first year and then goes into a reproductive phase in year 2 before dying. Perennials can be subdivided into two groups: simple perennials and creeping perennials. Simple perennials are primarily propagated by seed. A well-known example of this type of weed is dandelion. When not controlled, this apomictic weed produces seed that spreads easily throughout the landscape. Creeping perennials such as quackgrass or mouse-eared chickweed reproduce mostly through vegetative propagules such as stolons and rhizomes. Now we're going to move on to the basics of grassy weed identification. As shown in the illustration, a grass plant consists of several major parts. For plant identification, we will concentrate on the types and parts of the leaf and collar. For some weedy grasses, seed head morphology can be important. However, the seed heads that you will need to identify for this class are quite distinct from one another. The stem is the ascending axis of a plant, whether above or below ground, which ordinarily grows in an opposite direction to the roots. The leaf is actually made up of two parts, the blade and the sheath. The sheath is the tubular portion of the leaf that encloses the stem. The blade is the flattened portion of the leaf above the sheath. The area where the blade and sheath meet is called the collar. At the collar region, a plant may have a ligule and/or auricles. A ligule is a membranous or hairy appendage at the leaf sheath junction, and auricles are claw-like appendages occurring in pairs at the base of the leaf blade. Before looking at the leaves and other structures, you should determine the vernation and when you're trying to identify a weedy grass. Vernation refers to the arrangement of young leaves in a leaf bud before it opens. Vernation is one of the first characteristics you should look at when attempting to identify a grass plant. Here you can see the rolled vernation of tall fescue. And here you can see the folded vernation of perennial ryegrass. Leaf tips can be either boat-shaped or pointed. The last major structure of the grass plant that we will examine in this program is the collar, where the blade and sheath meet. The collar region of the grass plant contains some important identification features. There are several different types of ligules, as shown in this illustration. Typically, ligules are membranous, and species differ by the size and shape of their ligules. Some ligules, especially on warm season grassy weeds, are hairy. Here you can see the membranous ligule that's found on annual bluegrass. Auricles are short appendages that wrap around the front of the collar region. They can be long and clasping or claw-like. Many species do not have any auricles. Annual ryegrass, which is seen in this picture, has long clasping auricles. Quackgrass also has distinctive auricles that can be used for identification. Another part of the plant that may be useful for identification is the leaf surface. Some grassy weeds have surfaces that are more smooth than others and vice versa. The lower leaf surface of a grass is called the abaxial surface, while the upper leaf surface is called the adaxial surface. Growth habit difference between grassy weeds can also help with identification. Next, we're going to examine how to identify broadleaf weeds. For the most part, identification of broadleaf weeds is much easier than identification of grassy weeds. This picture shows general broadleaf plant morphology. You can see the two cotyledons on the plant to the left, as well as the differences between simple and compound leaves. On the right, you can see the petiole, or small stalk, that attaches the leaf to the main stem, the ochrea, which is a covering found on the stems of some species, and examples of both alternate and opposite leaf arrangements. All of these features will be useful for broadleaf weed identification. Notice that the cotyledons for both the alternate and opposite arrangement are opposite, while the difference is found on the leaves that come after the cotyledons. The cotyledons of weedy species exist in a number of different shapes and sizes. This is an excellent way to identify weedy species when they are still young and easier to control. Here you can see three examples of distinct cotyledon shapes on seedlings of broadleaf weeds. On mature leaves, the margins can take on a number of different forms, including smooth, lobed, pinnate, toothed, or undulated. Another useful characteristic that can be used for identification is the shape of the stem. Here you can see that common chickweed has a round stem, while ground ivy has a square stem. The ochrea, which was mentioned earlier, is found on members of the smartweed family. These three species are quite common in turf areas and can be easily confused. Using the characteristics we have discussed, you can separate the species by only looking at leaf structure. Black medic has a center leaflet that is stalked while the other leaves are not. Yellow wood sorrel has three heart-shaped leaflets. White clover has leaves that are serrated on the edge, and the compound leaf consists of three unstalked oval leaflets. Sometimes it is useful to use floral characteristics to identify weed species. On this slide, you can see the differences in color and form of flowers found on the same three easily confused weed species. This concludes the section on weed biology and general identification.